Welcome back to Real Estate Appraisal Principles and Procedures. This is your instructor, Matt Boxberger. And for week 10, we'll cover the first part of chapter 8, and we'll get into the real world practical application of filling out the bulk of your example appraisal report. So the chapter talks about data collection and reporting. And you'll see in chapter 8 that it really is a review of chapter 6 and steps in the appraisal process. And so it reviews and reemphasizes that you start with identifying the problem, starting with property rights and determining the scope of work. Step 3, gather, record, and verify the necessary data is where we'll spend most of the time. And so the approach I would suggest for you is to go ahead and read through the assigned portions of chapter 8, looking at the examples, but that you shortly thereafter start on the appraisal report and then can use chapter 8 as a reference, as well as the other documents that I posted in our week 8 folder. And so the chapter, after going through those initial steps in the appraisal process, presents what they call a data bank. And this may be a little bit of overkill. I would say from a practical standpoint, an appraiser may have 4, 5, 6 sources of data that are used regularly. But there's some special occasions where you may need to make phone calls to some of these secondary sources or national sources to fill in holes in your knowledge or what you've accumulated. And that then leads me to my other comment that much of the data you'll gather and use in your appraisal reports will be reusable. So you may only update the market data every quarter or so unless there's some significant change. And similarly, once you've described a neighborhood, the boundaries, the type of improvements of homes that are there, you may only need to update that every year or two. And so your first time through an appraisal report or the first time working in a new neighborhood, there's going to be quite a bit more time required to build up this foundational knowledge and to gather the data you need. So with that said, you can refer to the list in the book. It starts on page 206, and as you'll see, they have 50 potential data sources and 45 of them filled in. Another of the instructors here at West Valley, Mike Engels, has accumulated a similar kind of list of web-based resources, and that's another link I gave you in the folder for this week you can look at that would also give you potential sources for information. In the book, they do a fairly elaborate mapping of those data sources to the kind of information they can provide, and again, give you a starting point. And as you build up your experience and find your list of regular sources, you'll know where to go to. I think that having a lot of options here helps you understand that you need to make sure your sources are reliable, and you would see that if the same kind of information is reported several places, so you're confident that you're not relying on a biased or incomplete source. And so with that said, then we'll go ahead and look at the URAR form and the sections that we'll fill out. We've finished the subject section at the top of the report, and as I say in my instructions for the week, for this exercise we're assuming that this is a refinance transaction, and so there's not a purchase contract that needs to be analyzed, and so that second section of page 1 of the URAR won't need to be filled out. The balance of the page then is presenting information in these 3 areas: the neighborhood data, site data, and the building data. They call that the improvements, which would include the exterior features, the interior features if you do that kind of report where you go inside the home, and then accounting for any depreciation or describing the condition of the improvements. So with that, I'll conclude the lecture piece from the slides that are presented. As I said, you'll want to go through the reading in the book to cover it once and then use that as a resource as we go forward with filling out the appraisal report. So now let's switch over and just look at, and I'll talk through the basic sections of the appraisal report. So here I have total 2011, although I think it's still called total 2010 sample up here on this report. In any event, this is the a la mode example appraisal, and this is based in Oklahoma City. One of the reasons I didn't want to use the example in the book where they give you a long narrative description and then you fill out a form based on that was to give you an opportunity to look at your local neighborhood and start thinking about the factors that are applicable here. I felt that that would be more helpful for us. And so I have a example appraisal posted, as I mentioned earlier, from another local appraiser that has been used in appraisal classes before, so you can look at the type of comments that are in there as well. And so if we look at the neighborhood section, I'll talk through this, certainly read the book, look at the other examples as you tackle your report, and then if you have any questions or things still don't make sense, you can email me. If you get to this point before our optional on-site meeting that we're having, you can discuss it there as well. So we'll start here in the neighborhood section, and the location typically here in the Silicon Valley is going to be suburban. Sometimes you'll get rural properties or urban downtown properties, but the vast majority are going to be suburban. The question of what defines urban, suburban, rural is not explicitly spelled out, and appraisers will argue about this. I included a manual from one of the mortgage insurance companies on training their underwriters for what to look for. But I would say as we get into this and go through the rest of these fields, what you as an appraiser would want to do is make sure that if there's a factor that's unique or has a significant impact on property values that's different from the others in the area, that you highlight that and make sure that you spend some time discussing it. For others of these that are essentially the same for all the properties in a broad market area like the Silicon Valley, it's probably not as important in terms of what you choose. And if one appraiser would say, well, I think this is a urban area, and you would say, no, it's a little further out, we'll call it suburban. Those kind of things are really more semantics than impact on value. So with that, let's go ahead and continue on down. Built up would talk about the amount of developable land that has been improved, and then growth in the chapter, they talk about those stages in the real estate life cycle where as an area is just starting out, you would expect to see built up as somewhere under 75%, and the growth might be rapid, stable for the majority of the life cycle. And if an area is in decline, then you might say the growth rate is slow in that area. And you might also see property values declining. Demand and supply, again, obviously this is one that can be argued by appraisers, but in my experience or my practice, the two lines here, marketing time and demand supply, would tend to go hand in hand. That you would say if there's a shortage of properties, they may be snapped up fairly quickly, and the marketing time may typically be under 3 months. Here, as you can see in this report, they're saying it's in balance in 3 to 6 months. One unit housing prices, this again can be debated. What I try to do is reflect the entire neighborhood, not just homes that are similar to the subject. So if I've defined the neighborhood and my subject is a 2,000 square foot 5-bedroom, 2.5 bath, and that's typical, but there's pockets of older cottages, then I would include those in the age range and in the price range. Predominant would say, I was going to say mode, but perhaps median is the better statistical measure. Where would you say the majority of the prices and ages fall, or what's the one that's most frequent in the neighborhood? Land use, again, a neighborhood is typically similar in terms of land use, and so you would expect a lot of times that it may be 100% single family residences, although because of rapid growth and some older properties that may be grandfathered out, you'll sometimes see some small pockets of commercial properties, and depending on the neighborhood, there may be some apartment buildings and a few duplexes, and so it might be a typical neighborhood here in the Silicon Valley would be 85% single unit, 5% duplex, triplex, 5% multifamily, and maybe 5% commercial. Other could be something like agriculture. But again, you'd use this as you're filling out this report to paint the picture of your neighborhood where your home is at. Neighborhood boundaries here, they'll typically want to see north, south, east, west, or a triangular area bounded by some feature like freeways, rivers, city limits, that kind of thing. Neighborhood description, here you can see they push the comments back onto page 3, but you can see in the example reports that there's comments, and let's see if I can do this here. Yeah, we'll switch over to my PDF, and this is the one that was done here locally, where here's his neighborhood description, type of homes that are there, age range, how built out it is, and any kind of typical amenities that are nearby, as well as access to the freeways, public transportation, that kind of thing. And so now let's go back to total 2011. Market conditions. In this example, they talk a lot about financing and interest rates. I tend not to put that kind of comment in there. I look more for what's specific to the neighborhood, so I'll talk about what's the range of days on market that I've seen from the MLS, for example, and maybe a comment or two about the Silicon Valley job market, since ultimately jobs will drive housing values as well. So that concludes the neighborhood section, and then next we'll move into the site section of the report. If the lot has fairly rectangular or triangular kind of dimensions, you can spell that out here, or if not, a kind of textual description, irregular, approximately rectangular. You'll want to list the square footage of the site, and you can get that from public records, NDC data. Here again, the shape generally and the view, so that if there's a lake view or mountain view, you may put that in here. A lot of times I'll say neighborhood, because essentially that's what you can see from the home is up and down the street. The zoning classification, which again you'll typically get from NDC, although you have to be careful. There's some historical zoning codes that are still used that have been superseded. If it's an issue with the property where you're close to a commercial area, you may want to go ahead and go to the website for the city or county and look at the actual zoning description. Zoning compliance, again, this will be based on your observation and familiarity with the neighborhood. Typically it will be legal. There may be some older grandfathered uses where you need to check this box. Out here, even in the county areas, there are still zoning codes, and occasionally you'll find illegal additions or illegal structures, and you'll need to call that out and describe it as well. The highest and best use for residential properties in the middle of a residential neighborhood, this doesn't become a very difficult or controversial determination, and you could typically say yes. For commercial properties, areas in transition or near the fringes, there may be some issues where you need to look or discuss the highest and best use further, and if so, you would start that description here. And then there's a description of the typical utilities, and particularly in the rural areas, sometimes the water or the sewer service won't be public. It may be a mutual water company and a septic system, so you describe that. We don't have alleys in a lot of places here, and so you could put something like not applicable. The FEMA flood zone, if you're using the Total 2011 software, it will pull this up and populate this for you with the FEMA map and the date that's referenced, and X is actually one of the flood zones, so there can be A, B, C, or X, so that's not just a check mark, that's actually a designation for the flood zone. It gives you a chance to talk about whether the utilities and the off-site improvements, sidewalks, streets are typical for the market area. If they are, yes. If no, then you may need to discuss if that's going to have a significant impact on the value of the property or the desirability of the property, the ability to market it again for the lender in this case. And then a chance here to talk about any adverse conditions or external factors. We talked about the external obsolescence, if it's near a freeway, for example, or if there's pollution or those kind of things evidence nearby, then you'd put that here. If not, maybe just a summary comment about the site itself that you could add. And so we can look as well here on Mike Engel's site section, and again you can see it's fairly similar here, and he does talk about going to the attached addendum to put some more description of the site. And so then the next section we're going to move to is the improvements, and I'll switch back over here to the Total 2011 example. And again, you'll do this for your property as you walk through this section. And so now going through the improvements section starts with a general description. Is it a single home, a home with an accessory, an in-law unit, number of stories, is it detached, attached, semi-detached, end unit, existing construction, almost all the time it is. Sometimes you'll be called on to appraise proposed or incomplete construction, and you can indicate that here. The design or style, again, what may be traditional to you is contemporary to me. This only becomes an issue if there's differences in your comparables and that has an impact on value. The year built, the effective age, this reflects the amount of depreciation. Attic, so I'll do a little editorializing here. These forms were designed by Freddie and Fannie. There may be some parts of the country where the type of attic really does have an impact on value, but for me it's almost a little silly. But they give you the option here. You can say, how do you get to the attic? Drop stair, is it a finished attic, stairs, a scuttle, one of these panels that you push up and climb into the attic, and I suppose you could click finished and heated here, but the majority of the homes out here will either have no attic if it's a older flat roof construction or open construction, or the typical scuttle you'll see in a bedroom, closet, or potentially in the garage. The foundation here, you can describe whether it's concrete slab, the newer construction, or crawl space, the older construction out here. Occasionally you'll see basements, and then you'll be able to put in the detail there in terms of the area and the amount finished, and inside or outside exit. Sump pumps in basements in the Midwest, or where there's a water issue, you'll get a chance to call that out, but again, that's typically not done out here. Evidence of infestation, dampness, or settlement. If any of these were there, that probably would be a major issue with valuation, and you might actually be at the point where you'd need to stop the appraisal and talk to the lender, get a copy of an inspection report and reference that within the appraisal. But again, typically if it's not seen based on the appraiser's inspection, then you wouldn't check any of these. The heating system, forced warm air, hot water baseboard, radiant heating, the majority out here are either wall furnaces or the forced warm air systems, typically powered by natural gas. And again, as you're probably familiar, maybe half the homes have central air, the other half don't. Some of them will have individual wall units, and you can call that out here as well. This section, you describe the exterior of the property and each of the areas here, fireplaces, patio, deck, porch, and so on. If there's other things like a water feature, you may put that here. This section then would describe the interior of the home. You see that there's a slash here in condition, and so typically you'll make some determination of, is it average condition, good condition, poor. In this case they didn't do it. I'm pretty sure on Mike's here that he did, and you can see it's a fairly small space, so he's got some carpet, some hardwood, some tile, and it's in good condition. So he's calling out condition here, although he doesn't do it here. And again, this tells you that different underwriters will have different criteria that they look for. Some may mandate it, others may not. And again, based on your practice, you may have a standard way you'll do this. As I've said a couple times before, if it's an issue that's different from most of the homes in the neighborhood, you'll definitely want to call it out and discuss that further down here in this section where it says describe the condition of the property, including repairs, deterioration, renovation, and so on. So then the improvement section leads you on through the appliances that you'll call out. Some of these, like the refrigerator and washer dryer, unless they're built in, those are personal property, and so the form allows me to put a P there, and so I'll put that in and note that it's personal property and not included in the appraised value of the real property. The area of above grade and below grade isn't as frequently an issue out here as in some parts of the country, where you may have hillside homes that may have a lower level that opens on one side but is up against the earth in the other, and would be considered basement, and underwriters will say that that has to be valued separately or can't be compared with homes where all the rooms are above grade. So this is the section where you call out the above grade, not the basement or the walkout improvements. A little bit more free-form text here on any additional features, especially energy efficient items, and you can see they've got an example of that here. And then in this section is where you'll want to start highlighting any particular issues or features that are going to differentiate the property, or confirming that the property is in overall similar condition to other homes its age. And so you can see some example text here. And then in particular, if there's any that affect the livability, soundness, or structural integrity of the property, those would need to be called out. And like above with the infestation or settlement, probably a stopping point where you need to talk to the lender to make sure they're aware of that and would be able to underwrite it, or if they need to pursue that further in terms of getting those fixes made before you complete the appraisal. And then, as I said, the issue is Is it generally in conformance with other homes? And it asks you here on the form to explicitly call that out. So that takes us through page 1. Go ahead and use this lecture as a starting point, as I pointed out in the assignment that's in the folder, the book, the 2 example appraisals that you've got here, as well as that underwriting guide that has some more description of typically what's expected in those fields. All that can help you get familiar with what's being asked for and what you'll need to describe for your subject property.